talk today about mapping everything, but in a little bit different way, than you probably think, and also why we might want to map nothing. So I've broken this talk down to mapping as a process and the object, what we could call the object, the map as an object. And when I talk about the process of mapping, I want to address mapping everything. And when I talk about the map as an object, why we might want to map nothing. And these are suggestions, and putting the talk together was kind of challenging to think about this myself, and I found it kind of fascinating that there was a difference I found between mapping as a process and the map as an object. And so when I talk about mapping everything, I'm going to give two pathways to mapping everything, and when I talk about the map as an object, where I talk about mapping nothing, I'll talk two possible ways how we might map nothing. So the world is, the most important thing, I think, is the place itself. And without the place, we wouldn't be mapping, we wouldn't be here. And so I just want to remind us that it all comes back to the place itself. This is what's important. And this place is not this. It's not the database. The database is something different. And I know we do a lot of good work with data and the layers of data, but data itself separates what is the place. The place is interwoven. The place is constantly changing. And I'll be a little offensive here and say, I think in some ways we are addicted to a sort of pornography of data. And it is an indulgence where we are objectifying the place itself. And returning back to the place and going back again and again is really important, I think, for the map maker, for the making of maps. And that's what I do. Let's see if I can get this. There we go. I go back over and over again to not just to try and stop and become a part of the place. And so the mapping everything emerges out of this complexity of the place itself, the interwoven, ever-changing, mysterious nature of the place. So in mapping everything, I'm going to approach this with two avenues into mapping everything. And I don't mean that we are trying to assemble an enormous database, which I think there's this tendency to want to think that if we just get more data, better looking data, that it'll work. But it's still the place we need to go back to, and the place itself is not data. The place is this complex, interwoven piece of beauty that we breathe in and that we are a part of. That is us. We are the place itself. The first is not knowing. Not knowing is one of the ways which we can begin to enter into everything. If we start with not knowing, then we can explore this mystery in a myriad of ways, and we can find the experience itself. I don't think it's easy. I don't think we can force it. We can, quote, doodle in the margins and prepare ourselves, but we don't know when the place is going to enter into us. That's magical. That's the beauty. But we still have to be doodling in the margins. And by that I mean we have to be visiting the place with an open, not knowing, with a child's mind. My notes are coming apart. So that's the first. Not knowing, and thereby What does it say? Oh, not having a fixed notion. So even if we're going to make a bicycle map, for instance, I believe that we should start by not even knowing anything about bicycles or bicycle routes or anything. We should simply enter the place itself and find what emerges first. If we think we know, we're already arriving with agenda, and the place might not have that agenda for us. So we're best to start one avenue into the not knowing or mapping everything, and entering into that everything is not having a fixed idea about the place. The second avenue is bearing witness. And bearing witness is sort of a non-judgmental presence to everything that's happening. If it's something we don't like, if it's something we do like, if it's something we're familiar with, something we're not familiar with, maybe offended by, maybe desire itself. But bearing witness is the second avenue where we witness the place itself. We just simply witness it. We just bear witness to. And bearing witness comes from the Buddhist first moment of enlightenment, where this notion of nobody was around to witness Buddha being enlightened. It's a fabulous notion. Nobody was there. So who bore witness? The waters rose up. And as somebody who kind of would like to imagine what happened, I imagine maybe it was a massive flood that rose up at that time and became part of that story. I don't know. But that's one way of thinking about it. But in the notion that there was a witness, it's the water that rose up and witnessed that moment. So that's our job right now, as I think one way of entering into this everything of the place itself is to bear witness. Well, one of the things that is happening in the place itself is, of course, the temporal nature, not just the spatial. And I think many of the talks are quite fascinating that I've listened to because they remind us of this temporal nature of mapping. And now the next series of slides are all about 400 yards from where I live. So it's kind of fascinating. But the place itself, where I live, used to be along the Clark Fork, a wonderful place to gather bitterroot roots by the Salish and the Kootenai, which, by the way, yesterday was the anniversary of their exodus from the Bitterroot Valley. So that past lingers into the present moment. And of course, this is that one famous painting of this romance of the West, the takeover of the West by the colonial powers. But it's fascinating because everything's there, and if you look down in the corner, you can see the native people and schools and everything about progress and the train. And of course, the Public Land Survey is about ready to arrive with its massive grid over the landscape. But this is part of bearing witness. Whether we like it or not, that past is present. And in the Missoula Valley, it's not just this past, but it goes back further. It goes back to the glacial Lake Missoula and this massive valley we live in that's filled with the rubble from the lake. And right now there's this, about 200 yards from my house, this massive nuclear power station of condos being built. And they were delayed by about 3 months because they had to dig through glacial Lake Missoula. But the reason it's here is because this is the present moment. And I really don't like it, but I have to bear witness to it. It's something that I have to acknowledge in my wanting to be a part of everything. Okay, so that's mapping as a practice. So now I want to talk about the map as an object, or the object of a map. And I think that the time is probably past time that we start taking our mapping seriously as part of the problem of this destruction of the earth that is occurring. We had a little argument yesterday about whether our maps are responsible or not, but we can do something personally. And Thomas Merton has a famous essay about the rain and the irreverence of water raining down upon us. It's a wonderful essay, but in it he's, oh, where's my wand? Oh, I have a new wand. So this is my moment I get to say, do something. This is your chance to act. And taking action as a map maker is what we get to do. We get to make that object and put it out there. And Thomas Merton says, do this before all the water is censored and sold. All the water is being censored and sold. This is happening. It's happening fast. So my challenge is take action in that regard. And we all have that opportunity as map makers, and as our wonderful architect suggests, you too can do something about this. And so if we go back to this reminder that there is really this place that has everything in it in the present moment, including things we like and don't like, but it's one body. And I want to make that clear, that that one body, I was thinking about it with our masks on. And even in this 3 days here, I have dropped parts of my body that are now parts of your body. That's amazing. I mean, think about that for a minute. It's one body. And even in this very moment, part of my body is coming from your bodies. It's one body. To remind ourselves that that's one body, we might think of why we might want to map nothing. So I'll give, oh, there we go, map nothing. And I'm going to suggest that first about mapping nothing, what that is about. And I can't really read that there. So I'll let you read it. This is from an essay written long ago by D.H. Lawrence. And it's a pinhole photo that I took just to let you know that of a watershed in Berkeley. But D.H. Lawrence suggests that his known self is just a small clearing. And he doesn't want to know, he doesn't want to that knowledge, he doesn't want to take all that data and try and map everything in that other way of creating this huge database. He's content to say, my known self is just a small clearing in the forest. And I'm going to let God's come and go and inform me of other things. And Gary Snyder writes, he says, back there unseen, cold, proud eyes of cougar and coyote watch me rise and go. We want to leave nothing sometimes on the map because we want cold, proud eyes of cougar and coyote to come and go. That's part of our body. If we lose that body, it's gone. That's my body. So, 2 ways that I suggest we might map nothing is, 1, a tithe of 10%. And I spoke of this in a previous NACIS conference, and I'm still looking for a billionaire to bankroll this project for me. But so if you know of one friendly billionaire who's got a huge acreage, I'd like to take part of it and set it aside where we don't go, we don't take pictures, we don't study it, we don't fly over it, we just leave it. And we create that tithe of 10% for the other than human, because we want a place for the fox and the heron to come and go and watch us come and go, rather than to own them. So this is one way I think that that with a tithing of 10% on our maps, and I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but it's a challenge. Where's my little wand? Ah, yes. This is a challenge. I haven't used this much, so I don't really know how it works. The second way is leaping maps. And leaping maps is an idea that emerges from me, from a dear friend of mine, Robert Bly. And he talks about leaping poems. And when he talks about leaping poetry, what he's talking about is not Beowulf or Gilgamesh, these immense stories that lay out everything for us. It's like a database that we are seeking to achieve, that will have everything in it. No, what he's saying is, here is a leaping poem. It's going to let you off. It's not going to have a landing zone. You don't know where you're going to land. He doesn't know. He doesn't even want to tell you. But he's going to take you that far and let you leap. So I imagine maps can do that too. But first I'll let you read this poem by Robert called Preface. And it's a wonderful little leaping poetry because it doesn't tell you everything. It's not that huge story. It's just a little poem and it lets you. Now maybe you get it, maybe you don't. That's okay. So maybe you can turn to another leaping poem. But this is one, so I thought I'd give you an example of the poem. So here's a leaping map. This is a map that's made by a local artist. It's a map of the Clark Fork and the Bitterroot in the Trail of Tears that where they were the Salish Kootenai were exiled from the Bitterroot Valley, and they were forced north onto the reservation a little over 100 years ago. This is a beadwork. It's a gorgeous piece of work, but it doesn't tell you everything. It just lets you imagine and enter into this and go somewhere yourself. It inspires you. This is a couple of mine. This one's called Bending. I'm not trying to tell you everything about this bend in the Mississippi River. And this one is, again, a real place. And I'll finish up then with a little piece from my letterpress that I'm going to, Nat's going to pass out. And it's called, it's based on the fact that this is the Chinese New Year of the Red Buffalo. So as a geographer, I imagined, when I heard that there was a red buffalo, I imagined, well, it's walking. Of course. Well, then I said the first thing that occurred to me was, where is it walking? As a good map maker, where's the buffalo walking? So then I want to know, where's the map? So this is kind of a little piece of leaping for you. And thank you for your attention, and that's the end.